What would you do if the women you trusted to stand beside you on the most important day of your life destroyed the one thing you cherished most, then laughed in your face while doing it? What if those same women, dripping in diamonds and designer labels, had no idea that in exactly 12 minutes, armed royal guards would surround their penthouse and deliver a jewelry case containing a crown jewel worth more than their combined trust funds? I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all began, because you need to understand exactly how I ended up standing on a marble floor, my modest engagement ring crushed beneath a Louboutin heel, while my future sisters-in-law cackled like hyenas at a charity kill. My name is Emma Charlotte Hayes. At least, that's the name I'd been using for the past 4 years. My real name, the one printed on documents locked in vaults across 3 continents, is Her Royal Highness Emma Charlotte Adelaide von Rothenburg, Crown Princess of the Sovereign Duchy of Aldermere, heiress to the Rothenburg Adelaide fortune, a wealth so old and so vast that most people assume my family is just a footnote in dusty history books. They have no idea we still exist. They have no idea we still control mining operations across 4 continents, that we still hold seats on the boards of corporations whose names everyone knows, or that our family's trust is valued conservatively at $47 billion, conservatively. But 4 years ago, on my 26th birthday, I made a decision that horrified my mother, confused my father, and disappointed my younger brother Wilhelm. I announced that I was renouncing my titles temporarily, changing my name, and moving to New York City to live as a normal person, not forever, just long enough to know what it felt like to be wanted for something other than my bloodline and my bank account. You see, I'd spent my entire life behind palace walls and in private schools where everyone knew exactly who I was. Every friendship felt calculated. Every romantic interest came with the unspoken question: were they attracted to me, or to the fact that dating me meant access to wealth beyond imagination? By the time I turned 26, I'd been proposed to 4 times. 3 of those men had never asked me about my favorite book. 2 of them didn't know I was allergic to shellfish, despite having dated me for over a year. 1 of them called me by the wrong name in bed. I was suffocating in a gilded cage, and I needed to know if anyone could love Emma, just Emma, without the titles and the tiaras and the trust fund. My parents agreed on 3 conditions. I would maintain a minimal security detail that would stay invisible unless I was in immediate danger. I would check in weekly, and I would return home the moment I decided I'd had enough of this experiment. My father, ever the pragmatist, gave it 6 months before I came running back to the palace. I lasted 4 years. I got a job as an archivist at the Morgan Library and Museum in Manhattan. The pay was modest, $38,000 a year, but the work was extraordinary. I spent my days with illuminated manuscripts and rare first editions, handling history with gloved fingers, cataloging beauty that most people would never see. I rented a small studio apartment in Queens, a 4th-floor walk-up with radiator heat that clanged like church bells, and a shower that only produced hot water between 6 and 7 in the morning. It was cramped and loud, and sometimes smelled like the Thai restaurant on the 1st floor, and I absolutely loved it. I made friends, real friends. Sarah, who worked at the museum's front desk, invited me to her family's Thanksgiving dinner in the Bronx. Marcus, one of the senior archivists, taught me how to ride the subway without looking like a terrified tourist. I learned to budget, to grocery shop, to wait for sales, to understand the actual value of $1 when you had to earn every single one. And then, 2 years into my normal life, I met James Arthur Blackwood, 32 years old, with dark hair that fell across his forehead when he concentrated, and gray eyes that seemed to hold entire storms. He was an architect, or at least that's what he told me when we collided, quite literally, outside a coffee shop in Midtown on a Tuesday morning in October. I'd been rushing to work, balancing a tote bag full of reference books and a very full cup of coffee, when someone barreled around the corner and sent both me and my coffee flying. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry," he'd said, immediately crouching down to help me gather my scattered books. His British accent caught me off guard. "Please tell me none of these are irreplaceable first editions. Please tell me I haven't just destroyed something priceless." I'd laughed despite myself, despite the coffee soaking into my favorite cardigan. "They're reference books from the library. The only thing you've destroyed is my breakfast." He'd insisted on buying me a new coffee and a pastry as apology. We'd ended up talking for 45 minutes on a bench outside the shop. He told me he worked for a small architectural firm in Manhattan, that he'd moved from London 3 years prior, that he loved the energy of New York, but missed the green spaces of home. He asked me about my work, and when I told him about the illuminated manuscripts I was cataloging, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. He asked questions, real questions. He wanted to know about the pigments used in medieval inks, about the process of gold leafing, about whether I had a favorite piece in the collection. He didn't ask where I was from. He didn't ask about my family. He didn't try to assess my worth in the first 5 minutes of conversation. I fell for him slowly, and then, all at once, he took me to museums and hole-in-the-wall restaurants. We spent Sundays walking through Central Park, talking about everything and nothing. He lived in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, took the subway to work every day, packed his lunch in reusable containers. For our first Christmas together, he gave me a first edition of my favorite novel, Pride and Prejudice, a 1950s edition he'd found at a used bookstore in Greenwich Village. It had cost him maybe $40. I cried when I opened it because he'd remembered a conversation we'd had months earlier, a throwaway comment I'd made about loving Austen. It was the most thoughtful gift I'd ever received. He proposed to me on a Tuesday night in our apartment. Not his apartment or my apartment, but ours. We'd moved in together after a year of dating, finding a slightly larger place in Park Slope that we could just barely afford between our 2 salaries. He'd cooked dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta with homemade sauce, and as we were doing dishes together, he'd dried his hands, turned to me, and said, "Emma, I can't imagine doing dishes with anyone else for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small clear diamond, maybe 1/3 of a carat. It had cost him 3 months of careful saving. He told me this nervously, apologetically, promising that one day, when the firm made him a partner, he'd get me something bigger, something better. I'd kissed him with soapy hands and said yes 100 times because the ring was perfect. It was perfect because he'd chosen it himself, because it represented sacrifice and thought and love. I didn't care that I had a family vault containing jewelry that had adorned queens and empresses. I didn't care that I could buy myself a flawless 10-carat diamond without making a dent in my trust fund. This ring, this modest, simple ring, meant more than any of that, because James had given it to me when he thought I was just Emma, the archivist, not Emma, the princess. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, truly chosen, not for my name or my money, but for me. That feeling lasted exactly 14 months. The first crack in the facade appeared when James told me his family wanted to meet me. I'd been surprised it had taken this long. We'd been engaged for 2 months, living together for over a year, and dating for nearly 2 years total. I'd asked about his family before, but he'd always been vague. Distant relatives in England, not particularly close. A few cousins scattered around Europe. His parents had passed away when he was young, raised by his grandmother who had died just before he moved to New York. I understood loss. I didn't press. But now, apparently, there was family. Sisters, specifically, twin sisters, Arabella and Genevieve, who lived in Manhattan and wanted to host an engagement party for us. They're a bit much, James had warned me the night before we were supposed to meet them for dinner. They grew up with money. Very different lifestyle than what we have. I want you to be prepared. They can be judgmental. I'd squeezed his hand and assured him I could handle judgmental. I'd dealt with European aristocracy my entire life. How bad could 2 wealthy American sisters be? The answer, considerably worse than I'd imagined. Arabella and Genevieve Blackwood were 28-year-old identical twins who had clearly never been told no in their entire lives. They arrived 30 minutes late to the restaurant, a Michelin-starred establishment in Tribeca, where the cheapest entree cost $90, wearing coordinated Chanel suits and carrying Hermes bags. Arabella's was a Birkin in rouge casaque. Genevieve's was a Kelly in black. I recognized them immediately because my mother owned 7 Birkins. These bags started at $12,000 and went up from there depending on the leather and hardware. They looked at me the way you might look at something you'd scraped off your shoe. "So you're Emma," Arabella said, air-kissing near my cheeks without actually making contact. "James has told us absolutely nothing about you, which is fascinating. Don't you think, Jen?" "Absolutely fascinating," Genevieve echoed, her eyes scanning my outfit. I'd worn my best dress, a simple navy sheath from Banana Republic that I'd bought on sale. Next to their Chanel and their jewelry, I looked like I'd wandered in from a completely different tax bracket, which of course I had, just not in the direction they assumed. Dinner was an interrogation disguised as conversation. Where was I from? What did my parents do? Where did I go to school? What did I do for work? Each answer I gave was met with barely concealed disdain. "An archivist," Arabella had said, drawing out the word like it was something distasteful. How quaint. "And that pays, what, $40,000 a year?" "38, I'd corrected quietly. The twins had exchanged a look. "And you met James at a coffee shop," Genevieve said. "How very, when Harry met Sally. Very common." James had jumped in then, his voice tight. "Emma is brilliant at what she does. She works with documents and manuscripts that are literally priceless. She has a master's degree from Columbia." "Columbia," Arabella had said, perking up slightly. "Well, that's something at least. Did your parents pay for that? Or did you take out loans?" "I'm just curious about the financial situation James is walking into." My fingers had tightened around my fork. I had a scholarship. It was true. I had received a full academic scholarship to Columbia for my graduate. The admissions committee hadn't known who I really was. They'd accepted Emma Hayes on her merits. I'd been absurdly proud of that. But the twins had simply smiled at each other, a secret language passing between them that clearly said, "Scholarship student equals poor." The dinner continued in this vein for 2 excruciating hours. Every aspect of my life was examined and found wanting. My apartment was in an interesting neighborhood. My job was sweet, like a hobby. My engagement ring was delicate, which was twin speak for pathetically small. Through it all, James had tried to deflect, to change the subject, to stand up for me, but I could see something shifting in him, a tension in his shoulders, a hesitation before he defended me, like he was calculating whether contradicting his sisters was worth the social cost. When the check came, Arabella had plucked it up before James could reach for it. "We'll get this," she'd said magnanimously. "Consider it our engagement gift. I'm sure this meal cost more than Emma makes in a week." It had taken every ounce of my royal training not to react. In my real life, I'd attended state dinners where a single bottle of wine cost more than this entire meal. I'd worn tiaras worth more than this restaurant's annual revenue. But Emma Hayes, archivist, was supposed to be grateful and impressed, so I'd smiled and thanked them. In the cab ride home, I'd been quiet. James had reached for my hand. "I'm sorry," he'd said. "I told you they were a lot. They don't mean anything by it. They're just protective, and they've always had money, so they don't understand that there are more important things than designer labels and expensive restaurants." I'd wanted to ask why, if he understood that money wasn't everything. He seemed so desperate for his sister's approval, but I just nodded and leaned against his shoulder. It was the first time I'd lied to him through omission. Not about my identity, that was a lie I was already living, but about my feelings. I'd told him I was fine when I wasn't. It wouldn't be the last time. The twins became a constant presence in our lives after that. They called James daily. They inserted themselves into our wedding planning. They had opinions on everything. The venue, too cheap. My dress budget, embarrassingly low. The guest list, too small and filled with nobodies. When I'd suggested we get married at City Hall and have a small dinner with close friends afterward, something intimate and meaningful, Arabella had actually laughed out loud. "You can't be serious," she'd said. We were at her penthouse apartment, a sprawling space in the Upper East Side with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. She'd insisted on hosting a wedding planning brunch, which meant mimosas and passive-aggressive commentary. "Emma, darling, you may be used to doing things on a budget, but James is a Blackwood. We have standards, expectations. People will be watching." "What people?" I'd asked. "James works at a small architectural firm. I work at a library. Who exactly is watching?" Genevieve had exchanged another one of those looks with her twin. "You really don't know, do you?" "James, you didn't tell her?" James had shifted uncomfortably on the white leather sofa. "Didn't tell her what?" "About the family. About father's estate. About grandmother's connections." I'd turned to James, confused. "I thought your parents passed away when you were young. I thought you were raised by your grandmother, and she died before you moved to New York." "She did," James said quickly. "She did die, but she left. There was an inheritance, a trust. The twins have been managing some of the family assets, and what James is trying to say," Arabella interrupted, "is that our family has considerable wealth. Not new money, not flashy, but old, established British wealth. Estates, investments. Our great-grandfather was a viscount. We have expectations about how family weddings are conducted." The room had tilted slightly. "You're titled?" "Distantly," James said. "It's not a big deal. The title went to a cousin. But there's still family money, and the twins are right. There are certain traditions. So when you told me you worked at a small architectural firm and lived modestly because that's what you could afford, you were lying?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "I wasn't lying," James said defensively. "I do work. I don't touch the trust unless I absolutely have to. I wanted to make it on my own, the same as you. I thought you'd understand that. And I did understand it. Of course I did. I was doing exactly the same thing, but the hypocrisy of it was staggering. Here I was, hiding my identity and wealth to find genuine love, and I'd found someone who was also hiding his identity and wealth. We were both liars, both pretending to be something we weren't. The difference was, James's family knew the truth, and they assumed I was a gold digger trying to trap their brother. I should have told him then. I should have revealed everything, laid my cards on the table, and we could have laughed at the absurdity of it all. Two people from wealthy families, both pretending to be ordinary, who'd found each other anyway. But I didn't, because I needed to know. If James believed I was just an archivist making $38,000 a year, would he still choose me? Or would his sister's opinions slowly poison his love? I needed to know if I'd actually found what I was looking for, or if I'd simply found another man who would eventually choose wealth and status over me. The answer started revealing itself slowly, in increments so small I could almost pretend I wasn't seeing them. James started apologizing for me. Little things at first. Emma's not used to these kinds of restaurants. Emma didn't grow up around this kind of luxury. Always with a loving smile. Always positioned as explanation rather than criticism. But the message was clear. I was other. I was less. He started asking me to change. "Maybe don't mention how much you make when we're around my sisters. It just gives them ammunition. Could you maybe borrow a nicer dress for the charity gala? I know you don't have anything appropriate, and I don't want you to feel out of place." The twins ramped up their campaign. Every interaction was a carefully constructed reminder that I didn't belong. They'd discuss fashion and name-drop designers, then turn to me with saccharine smiles. "Oh, but you probably don't follow fashion, do you, Emma? You're so refreshingly unconcerned with appearances." They'd talk about their recent vacations to Positano, to St. Bart's, to private islands, whose names I actually recognized because my family owned property near several of them. Then they'd ask me where I'd traveled, and when I mentioned the backpacking trip I'd taken through Southeast Asia during my normal person phase, they'd wrinkle their noses. "How brave of you. I could never do hostels. The germs." Every wedding planning session became a battlefield. They wanted the reception at the plaza. I wanted something smaller, more intimate. They insisted on a designer wedding dress, offering to pay for it because clearly you can't afford anything appropriate. I wanted to find something simple and elegant that didn't cost more than a car. James, caught in the middle, started choosing them more often than he chose me. "It's just easier," he'd said one night, after I'd objected to having 300 people at our wedding when we'd originally planned for 70. "They're paying for most of it, Emma. We can't afford the wedding you and I would want, and they're offering to give us something beautiful. Can't you just compromise?" But it wasn't compromise. Compromise implied both sides giving something up. This was capitulation, and I could afford the wedding I wanted. I could afford to buy the plaza and have the wedding there if I wanted. But Emma Hayes couldn't, and Emma Hayes was who he thought he was marrying. The final straw, the moment that led to me standing on that marble floor with my crushed ring, came in the form of an invitation. Arabella and Genevieve wanted to throw me a bridal shower. "Just us girls," they'd said, "a chance to bond before I officially became a Blackwood." They'd invited their closest friends, women I'd never met, society women with hyphenated last names and trust funds and summer houses in the Hamptons. James had encouraged me to go. "They're trying," he'd said. "They're really making an effort to welcome you. Can't you meet them halfway?" So I'd said yes. The shower was held at Genevieve's penthouse, a different property from Arabella's, but equally palatial, this one overlooking the Hudson River with a private terrace that probably cost more per month in maintenance fees than my annual salary. I'd arrived to find 15 women, all dressed in designer casual, all holding champagne flutes, all looking at me like I was a fascinating science experiment. The games were standard bridal shower fare, but laced with small cruelties. They played a game where they quizzed me on James's favorite things, and I got several wrong because, as it turned out, there were aspects of James's life that he'd never shared with me. His favorite vacation spot was Santorini, not Paris, as he'd told me. His favorite restaurant was some exclusive place in London that required a 6-month reservation, not the Thai place in our neighborhood where we got takeout twice a month. I was learning in real time that my fiancé had been lying to me about who he was, and his family was delighting in watching me realize it. But I smiled through it. I drank my champagne. I ate tiny canapes that probably cost $20 each. I opened gifts, lingerie in sizes that were subtly wrong, clearly intended to make me self-conscious about my body. Kitchen gadgets for a kitchen I didn't have, because Genevieve kept saying things like, "Well, once you move in with James to a proper apartment, you'll need these." I hadn't known we were moving. James and I hadn't discussed leaving our Park Slope apartment, but apparently that decision had been made without me. And then came the moment that changed everything. One of the twins' friends, a woman named Claudia with a diamond tennis bracelet that probably cost $60,000, picked up my left hand to examine my engagement ring. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with performative sympathy. "How sweet. It's so delicate, so minimal." "James chose it," I said quietly, trying to pull my hand back. But Claudia held on, bringing my hand closer to her face, like she was examining a curiosity. "Is that even a real diamond? It must be, what, a third of a carat? Maybe a quarter?" "A third," I confirmed, my jaw tight. "Well," Claudia continued, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "I suppose it's the thought that counts. Some men just don't prioritize these things, or can't afford to." Several women tittered. Arabella and Genevieve smiled into their champagne glasses. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, "I love this ring. It's perfect because James gave it to me." "Of course you do," Genevieve said, her tone suggesting she thought I was lying to save face. "It's very you, Emma. Understated, simple, not trying too hard." Another round of laughter, sharper this time, and then Arabella stood up, weaving slightly. She'd been drinking steadily since I'd arrived 2 hours ago. "You know what? I think we should give Emma a real bridal shower gift, something actually valuable." She walked to a drawer in the kitchen and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, a massive emerald-cut diamond, easily 3 carats, set in platinum with smaller diamonds on the band. "This was our grandmother's," Arabella said, holding it up to the light where it threw rainbows across the white walls. "She left jewelry to be distributed among the family. I think Emma should have this, an upgrade from that sad little thing she's been wearing." My hands clenched at my sides. "I don't want an upgrade. I want the ring my fiancé gave me." Don't be ridiculous, Genevieve said, standing to join her sister. You're going to be a Blackwood. You can't walk around with that on your finger. What will people think? That we're poor? That James doesn't value you? James does value me, I said, my voice rising slightly. This ring is a symbol of his love, not his bank account. Arabella rolled her eyes. Oh, please, don't be so naive. Of course it's about money. Everything is about money. And that ring says, James got you at a discount. The room had gone quiet, all eyes on us. I could feel my heart pounding, my royal composure slipping. In my real life, I would have ended this conversation with a single look, a reminder of exactly who I was and what I could do to anyone who disrespected me. But Emma Hayes had no power here. Emma Hayes was supposed to be grateful for the scraps these women threw at her. I don't want your grandmother's ring, I said clearly. I want mine. Fine, Arabella said, her voice turning cold. Keep your pathetic little ring, but don't say we didn't try to help you. She reached out, ostensibly to hand me back the ring box, but her movements were jerky from the alcohol. Her hand knocked against mine, and I felt my engagement ring catch on something. The edge of her bracelet, maybe, or her ring. And then, in what happened so fast I almost couldn't process it, my engagement ring flew off my finger. It arced through the air, catching the afternoon light, and landed with a tiny, almost inaudible clink, right into the garbage disposal drain of the kitchen sink. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then Genevieve started laughing. Oh my God, that's actually hilarious. Get it out, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Get it out right now. Arabella peered into the sink, making a show of looking concerned. Oh dear. Emma, I'm so sorry. That was completely an accident, but I don't think we can reach it. The drain is so deep and— Turn on the disposal, Claudia said suddenly, her eyes glittering with malice. Make sure it's really gone. My blood turned to ice. Don't you dare. It was a joke, Claudia said, laughing. God, you're so sensitive. Can't you take a joke? But Genevieve was moving toward the sink, her hand hovering over the disposal switch, a cruel smile playing on her lips. I mean, it's probably better this way. Now James will have to get you a proper ring, a Blackwood ring. Genevieve, step away from that sink. My voice came out in a tone I hadn't used in 4 years, the tone I used when addressing staff at the palace who had overstepped, the tone that carried generations of absolute authority. It stopped her for a second. She blinked at me, confused by the sudden shift. But then Arabella was there, drunk and emboldened by her friends watching. Oh, come on. It's just a ring, a cheap ring. You said yourself it only cost a few $1,000s. James can buy you another one. And before I could move, before I could stop her, Arabella's hand slammed down on the disposal switch. The grinding sound filled the penthouse. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The mechanical whir of metal blades destroying the one piece of jewelry that had ever meant anything to me. The physical representation of the only time someone had loved me for myself, not my title or my money. When Arabella turned off the disposal, the silence was deafening. I stared at the sink, at the drain where my ring had been. My hands were shaking, not with sadness, but with a rage so pure and cold, it felt like ice in my veins. Oops, Arabella said, not sounding sorry at all. I'm so sorry, Emma. I'm just so clumsy when I've been drinking. But really, it's fine. James will get you something better, something actually appropriate for our family. I looked up at her smug face, at Genevieve beside her, trying not to laugh, at the 15 women scattered around the penthouse, some looking uncomfortable, others openly enjoying my humiliation. 4 years. 4 years I'd spent living as a normal person, swallowing my pride, accepting condescension and dismissal and cruelty from people who wouldn't have dared speak to me this way if they knew the truth. I'd done it all to answer one question. Could someone love me for who I was, not what I had? And I'd gotten my answer. James, who supposedly loved simple, modest Emma, had slowly transformed into someone who apologized for me, who asked me to change, who let his family treat me like garbage because standing up for me was inconvenient. The experiment was over. I pulled my phone from my purse, my real phone, Not the basic smartphone I'd been using as Emma Hayes, but the secured device I kept for emergencies. I'd only used it twice in 4 years, once when I'd been mugged and my invisible security detail needed to intervene, and once when my father had a health scare and I'd needed to get updates from the palace physicians. I scrolled through my contacts to a number I'd never called, but that had been programmed in since the day I'd left Aldermere. I pressed dial. It rang once. A crisp, professional voice answered in German-accented English. "Your Highness, how may we serve you?" "Heinrich," I said calmly, using the language of my childhood, the aristocratic dialect that marked me as royalty even over the phone. "I need a full security detail at this address within 15 minutes. I also need the item from Vault 7, the one my mother wore to the coronation gala in 2010. Have it delivered in the full ceremonial case." There was a pause. Then, "The Aldermere sapphire, Your Highness. That's the one. Consider it done. 15 minutes. I hung up. Around me, the women were chattering, some trying to console me with false sympathy, others already moving on to the next activity, the next drink, bored now that the entertainment of my humiliation was over. Genevieve was saying something about how we should play another game, something about newlywed. When the penthouse door opened, James walked in, carrying flowers, peonies, my favorite. He was smiling, that handsome smile that had made me fall for him in the first place. "Surprise," he said. "I got off work early and thought I'd crash the end of the shower. I wanted to see my beautiful—" He stopped. His eyes found me standing by the sink, my face pale, my hands still shaking. "Emma, what's wrong?" I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, I would either start screaming or start crying, and I refused to give these women the satisfaction of either. Arabella jumped in, her voice syrupy sweet. "Oh, James, there you are. We had a tiny accident. Emma's ring fell into the disposal and I accidentally turned it on. But it's fine. It's actually a blessing. Now you can get her something more appropriate." "We were just saying, you destroyed her ring?" James's voice was quiet, dangerous. "You destroyed Emma's engagement ring?" For the first time, I saw something in James that gave me hope. Real anger. Not the performative kind he'd shown when defending me to his sisters before ultimately giving in, but genuine fury. "It was an accident," Genevieve said quickly. "And honestly, James, that ring was embarrassing. You're a Blackwood. She should be wearing something that reflects that." "That ring," James said, his voice shaking, "represented every spare dollar I saved for 6 months. I chose every detail of it myself, and you destroyed it?" He turned to me, and I saw something crumble in his expression. Guilt, shame. The realization of what he'd allowed to happen by bringing me into this world, by not protecting me from his family's cruelty. "Emma," he said softly, "I'm so sorry. I'll get you another one. I'll get you 10 rings. It's too late," I said, my voice hollow. And it was. Not because the ring was destroyed, though that hurt more than I could articulate, but because in that moment, I saw our entire future laid out before me. A life of me bending and changing and shrinking to fit into the Blackwood family. James would defend me sometimes when the cruelty was too blatant to ignore, but ultimately, he would always choose the path of least resistance, and that path would never be me. I'd found my answer. James had loved Emma Hayes when loving her cost him nothing, when she was a private romance, separate from his real life. But when it came time to actually integrate me into his world, to stand up for me against his family, to choose me over their approval, he'd failed. I wasn't angry at him. I was just done. 14 minutes, I said quietly, checking my phone. 14 minutes until what? James asked, confused. I didn't answer. I walked past him, past the scattered bridal shower debris, past the women in their designer clothes, with their designer bags, and their small, cruel lives, and I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson. Behind me, I could hear James trying to get answers from his sisters. Arabella was defensive, insisting it was an accident. Genevieve was dismissive, saying I was overreacting. Some of the other women were gathering their things, clearly uncomfortable, and wanting to leave before whatever was happening escalated further. I watched the street below, watched the normal people going about their normal lives. I'd been one of them for 4 years, and it had been simultaneously the best and worst experience of my life. Best because I'd learned who I actually was, separate from my title. Worst because I'd learned that even without the title, people would find reasons to treat me as lesser. The cruelty wasn't about my wealth or lack thereof. It was about power, and these women had decided I didn't have any. They were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they were. At exactly 13 minutes, I saw them. 3 black SUVs, Mercedes G-Wagons with tinted windows and diplomatic plates, pulling up in front of the building. They parked in a perfect formation that blocked traffic. Nobody inside the vehicles moved yet. Emma, James was beside me now. Talk to me. I know you're upset, and you have every right to be, but we can fix this. I'll make this right. You can't, I said simply. I can. I'll buy you a new ring, a better ring, and I'll tell my sisters they're not welcome at our wedding. I should have done that months ago. I've let them poison everything, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He sounded sincere. He probably was sincere in that moment. But sincerity didn't erase months of death by 1,000 cuts. It didn't change the fact that he'd needed his sisters to destroy something precious before he finally drew a line. At 14 minutes, my phone buzzed. A text in German. "We have arrived, Your Highness. Awaiting your signal." I looked around the penthouse one last time, at the 15 women who'd come to celebrate my upcoming marriage, while simultaneously mocking every aspect of my life. At Arabella and Genevieve, who'd made it their mission to break me down and mold me into something acceptable to them. At James, who'd promised to love me, but had really just loved the idea of me until I became inconvenient. "You should all step away from the windows," I said clearly. "What?" Genevieve laughed. "Why would we?" The door to the penthouse opened. Not a knock, not a doorbell, just opened, because when you're royal security with diplomatic credentials, you don't wait for permission. 4 men entered. They weren't bulky bodyguards from movies. They were precisely trained, military-bearing professionals in dark suits with earpieces. You could see it in the way they moved, the way they scanned the room, assessing threats and exits in seconds. These were the kind of men who protected heads of state. Behind them came 2 more figures. My private secretary, Heinrich, a man in his 60s who'd served my family for 40 years, carrying a brushed steel briefcase that was clearly reinforced, and my head of security, Captain Stefan Aldricht, in full ceremonial uniform. The room had gone completely silent. Heinrich walked directly to me, ignoring every other person in the penthouse like they were furniture. He bowed, not a casual nod, but a formal bow from the waist. "Your Royal Highness," he said in English, pitched to carry across the room. "We came as quickly as possible. I've brought the item you requested from the vault." Behind me, I heard someone gasp. James made a sound like he'd been punched. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on Heinrich as he placed the case on Genevieve's imported marble coffee table and entered a code on the biometric lock. It opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing custom foam interior. Nestled inside was the Aldermere sapphire. It wasn't a ring. It was a masterpiece. The centerpiece was a 47-carat cushion-cut sapphire, the color of midnight, surrounded by a double halo of colorless diamonds. The sapphire itself was legendary. It had been mined from our family's holdings in Madagascar in 1887 and had adorned 4 generations of Aldermere royalty. The setting was platinum and white gold, designed by Cartier in 1952, specifically for my grandmother's coronation. The smaller diamonds totaled another 32 carats. Conservative auction estimates put it at $25 million, but it would never go to auction. It was part of the Aldermere crown jewels, inalienable property of the duchy. My mother had worn it when she met the Queen of England. I'd seen it in our vault my entire life, never imagining I'd have reason to wear it outside of state functions. Heinrich lifted it from the case with gloved hands and held it out to me. "Your Highness, may I?" I extended my left hand, the hand that minutes ago had worn a simple gold band with a 3-carat diamond, the hand that these women had mocked and pitied. Heinrich slid the Aldermere sapphire onto my ring finger. It fit perfectly, because of course it did. It had been sized for me years ago, part of the collection of crown jewels I would inherit when I eventually became Duchess. The sapphire caught the afternoon light and seemed to glow with its own internal fire. The diamonds threw prisms across the white walls. It was heavy on my hand, the weight of history and wealth and power. I finally turned around. 15 women stood frozen in various states of shock. Claudia had dropped her champagne flute. It lay shattered on the floor, pink liquid seeping into the white rug. Several women had their phones out, clearly having Googled what they'd just heard, their faces going progressively paler as they read. Genevieve was white as paper. Arabella looked like she might be sick. And James was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, like I was a stranger. "Emma," he whispered, "what's happening? Who are these people? What did he call you?" I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. He called me by my title, Your Royal Highness, or if you prefer the full version, Her Royal Highness, Emma Charlotte Adelaide von Rothenburg, Crown Princess of the Sovereign Duchy of Aldermere. "And that's not possible," Arabella said, her voice shaking. "You're a librarian. You live in a shitty apartment in Brooklyn. You make $38,000 a year. You're nobody." "I'm an archivist," I corrected, "and I was conducting an experiment. I wanted to know what it felt like to be loved for myself, rather than my title or my trust fund. I wanted to meet someone who didn't care about money or status." I looked directly at James. I thought I'd found that. I was wrong. "You lied," James said. "This whole time, you lied to me." "I did," I acknowledged, "just like you lied to me. About your family's wealth, about your trust fund, about who you really were. The difference is, I lied to protect myself. You lied because you were ashamed of me." "That's not true," he said, but it sounded hollow. We both knew it was true. I turned to Arabella and Genevieve. They were holding hands, the twins united in their shock and growing fear. "You destroyed something that meant the world to me," I said conversationally. "You did it because you thought I was powerless. You thought I was some poor little nobody who should be grateful for your scraps and your charity. You thought you could humiliate me without consequences." "It was an accident," Genevieve said, but her voice cracked. "We didn't mean—" "You absolutely meant it," I interrupted. "You've been cruel to me from the moment we met. Every comment, every suggestion, every piece of advice was designed to make me feel small, to remind me that I didn't belong in your world." I smiled again. "The irony is, my world makes yours look like a child's playhouse." I gestured to Heinrich, who pulled out an iPad and began reading in his crisp, professional tone. "The Aldermere Duchy maintains a sovereign wealth fund currently valued at $47 billion. The von Rothenburg Family Trust holds controlling interests in mining operations across 4 continents, including rare earth elements essential to modern technology. The family maintains estates in 7 countries and holds seats on the boards of 12 Fortune 500 companies. Her Royal Highness is the sole heir to these holdings and will assume full control upon her 30th birthday or her marriage to an approved consort, whichever comes first." He looked up. "Additionally, the duchy maintains full diplomatic relations with 73 countries, including the United States. Her Royal Highness carries a diplomatic passport and enjoys full immunity under international law." The room was so quiet I could hear someone's ragged breathing. Might have been Arabella, might have been James. "Now," I continued, "let's talk about consequences. You destroyed my property. That ring cost James 3 months of saving, roughly $6,000 if my math is correct. Normally, I'd simply sue you in civil court. But given that you committed this act of destruction in front of witnesses while I was operating under diplomatic protection, this becomes an international incident if I choose to make it one." "You can't be serious," Genevieve whispered. "I'm completely serious. Captain Aldrich, what are our options here?" The head of security stepped forward. He was 6'4", built like a tank, and his uniform displayed medals from military service across Europe. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Under international treaty, any act of aggression or theft against a protected royal person can be prosecuted as a diplomatic crime. The penalties include asset seizure, travel restrictions, and potential extradition for trial in Aldermere. He paused. "However, Her Highness is known for her mercy. I'm certain she would consider alternative resolutions." All eyes turned back to me. I let them wait, let them stew in their fear. These women who'd spent 2 hours making me feel worthless were now terrified of what I might do to them. The power dynamic had inverted so completely and so quickly that I could see several of them trembling. "James," I said, not looking at him, "did you know who they were when you introduced me to your sisters? Did you know what they would do to me?" "No," he said immediately. "Emma, Your Highness, I swear I didn't know. I knew they could be snobby, but I never thought they'd go this far. I never wanted this." "But you let it happen," I said softly. "Month after month, you watched them chip away at me, and you did nothing. You asked me to compromise, to change, to accept their cruelty, because confronting them was uncomfortable for you." "I was wrong," he said, and there were tears in his voice. "I was so wrong. But Emma, we can fix this. Now that everything's out in the open, we can start over. No more lies, no more pretending, just you and me, as we really are." I finally turned to look at him, at this man I'd loved, this man I'd planned to marry, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not love, nothing. "The person you fell in love with doesn't exist," I said. "Emma Hayes was a character I played, and the James Blackwood who courted her, who claimed to value love over money, who said he didn't care about wealth or status, he doesn't exist either. He was the person you pretended to be, to live out some fantasy of making it on your own while still having your trust fund safety net." "That's not fair," he protested. "Isn't it? When did you plan to tell me about your family's wealth? Before or after the wedding? Or were you going to keep pretending forever, living in our modest apartment while your sisters pulled strings behind the scenes?" He didn't have an answer for that. I turned back to Arabella and Genevieve. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave James alone. No more phone calls, no more inserting yourselves into his life, no more family obligations. You're going to take your trust funds and your society friends, and you're going to stay far away from him." "You can't dictate," Arabella started. "I absolutely can," I cut her off, "because in about 30 seconds, a call is going to be placed to your family's wealth management firm, the firm that handles the Blackwood Trust, and they're going to receive a very interesting offer from a Aldermere holding company to purchase certain assets that your trust funds are dependent on." "Are you following me?" The color drained from her face. "You wouldn't. Try me," I said coldly. "You spent months trying to destroy my relationship because you thought I wasn't good enough for your family. You mocked my job, my clothes, my home, my ring, and today, you destroyed the one piece of jewelry that actually mattered to me. So yes, I absolutely would dismantle your entire financial life if it meant teaching you that there are consequences for cruelty." I pulled out my phone. "Or you could apologize, sincerely, and then you could leave and never contact any of us again. Your choice. You have 30 seconds. The twins looked at each other, that silent communication passing between them. But this time, it wasn't smug superiority, it was panic. "We're sorry," Genevieve said quickly. "We're so sorry, Your Highness. We were wrong. We were cruel. We'll leave James alone. We'll stay away. Please don't." "I don't want your apology," I said. "I don't care if you're sorry. I just want you gone." I nodded to Captain Aldrich. "Please escort these women out, all of them, and make sure building security has their names. They're not to be allowed back into this building." The security team moved with military efficiency. Within 2 minutes, 15 shocked, frightened women were being herded toward the door. Some were crying, others were frantically texting, probably trying to do damage control, to figure out if what I'd said was true. It was all true, every word. As they filed out, Arabella stopped at the door. She looked back at me, at the sapphire on my finger that cost more than she'd spend in a lifetime. "You're a monster," she said quietly. "You played with my brother's heart. You made him fall in love with a lie." "No," I correct. "I gave him the opportunity to love me without my money getting in the way. He failed, just like you failed to be a decent human being when you thought you had power over me. The only difference between us is that when I have power, I use it justly. You use it to destroy things that don't belong to you." She left without another word, and then it was just James and me, alone in his sister's penthouse, with my security detail standing silently by the door. "Emma," he said, "Princess, I don't even know what to call you." "Emma is fine," I said. "It's still my name, even if it's not the whole name." "Did you ever love me? Or was I just part of your experiment?" The question hung in the air. It was a fair question. Maybe the only fair question he'd asked all day. I did love you, I said honestly. I loved the man who collided with me outside a coffee shop and spent 45 minutes asking me about medieval manuscripts. I loved the man who gave me a used book for Christmas because he remembered an offhand comment I'd made. I loved the man who proposed to me while we were doing dishes. I paused. But that man disappeared the moment your sisters entered our lives. He was replaced by someone who apologized for me, who asked me to change, who chose his family's approval over my dignity again and again and again. I can be that man again, James said desperately. Now that I know who you really are, now that we don't have to hide or pretend. But that's the point, I interrupted. You should have been that man, regardless of who I was. You should have defended me, whether I was an archivist making $38,000 a year or a princess worth billions. My worth as a person, my right to be treated with respect, shouldn't have depended on my bank account. I pulled the ring off my finger, not the Aldermere sapphire. I couldn't remove that easily. But I mimed the motion, the gesture of ending this. I came to New York to find someone who would love me for who I am inside, someone who would value me for my character, my mind, my heart. I thought you were that person, but the truth is, you loved me when loving me was easy and cost you nothing. The moment it became difficult, the moment it required you to choose between me and your family's approval, you chose them. Every single time. That's not true, he said, but it was a weak protest. Isn't it? How many times did you ask me to compromise? How many times did you suggest I change my clothes, hide my background, accept their insults for the sake of peace? You never once asked them to change. You never demanded they treat me with respect. It was always easier to ask me to bend than to ask them to be decent. He had no answer. We both knew I was right. I walked toward the door, toward Heinrich and Captain Aldricht, and the security that had always been there, invisible, waiting for me to need them. For what it's worth, I said, stopping at the threshold, I think you're a good man who made bad choices. You let your sister's toxicity poison something that could have been beautiful. Maybe one day you'll find someone who actually fits into your world, someone your family approves of, and you'll be happy. I don't want someone who fits my world, James said. I want you. No, I said gently. You want the idea of me. You want the simple archivist you could mold and shape and improve. You don't want the real me, the woman with her own power and wealth and status, because that woman doesn't need you, and being needed was always part of the appeal, wasn't it? I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out of the penthouse, my security detail falling into formation around me. As we stepped into the elevator, I caught one last glimpse of James standing alone in his sister's pristine white penthouse, surrounded by the debris of a party meant to celebrate our future. He looked lost. I felt free. The SUVs were waiting outside, exactly as I'd ordered. As we drove away from the Upper East Side, away from that life, Heinrich handed me my real phone with a dozen messages from my family. My mother. Heinrich informed me, "You've activated full security protocols. Are you safe? Are you coming home?" My father. "Your security chief says you've ended the experiment. I'm proud of you for knowing when to walk away. Your rooms are ready whenever you wish to return." My brother Wilhelm. "Did you really threaten to dismantle someone's trust fund? That's so badass. Can't wait to hear the whole story." I smiled despite myself and typed a response to all three. I'm safe. I'm okay. And yes, I'm coming home. I'll explain everything when I arrive. As the SUV merged onto the highway toward Teterboro Airport, where the family jet was undoubtedly already being prepped for departure, I looked down at the Aldermere sapphire on my finger. It was beautiful, priceless, a symbol of my heritage and my future, but I would have traded it in a heartbeat for that simple gold band with its 3-carat diamond, not because of its value, but because of what it represented. A moment when someone chose me without knowing what I was worth. A moment of pure, untainted connection. That moment was gone now, destroyed as thoroughly as the ring itself. But I'd learned what I came to learn. I'd answered my question. And sometimes, that's the best you can hope for. 3 months later, I stood in the grand hall of Aldermere Palace, wearing my full ceremonial regalia for the first time since I'd left. The gown was burgundy velvet, the color of our house. The Aldermere sapphire was on my finger, but today it was joined by other pieces from the crown jewels. A diamond tiara that had belonged to my great-great-grandmother, a necklace of graduated sapphires and diamonds, earrings that caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. I was addressing the Duchy Council, formally resuming my duties as crown princess. My experiment in normal life was over. My 30th birthday was approaching, and with it, increased responsibilities in managing the family's holdings and diplomatic relationships. My father stood beside me, proud and relieved to have me home. My mother sat in the front row, regal as always, but I'd caught her wiping away tears when I'd first entered the hall. Wilhelm was there too, giving me encouraging thumbs up from his seat with the junior royals. I was home. I was myself again. Her Royal Highness, Emma Charlotte Adelaide von Rothenburg, Crown Princess of Aldermere, and I was done apologizing for it. After the ceremony, during the reception, my private secretary approached with a tablet. Your Highness, there's a matter that requires your attention. The Blackwood Family Trust. Our holding companies did acquire several of their key assets as you authorized. The trustees are requesting a meeting to discuss terms for buying them back. I thought about Arabella and Genevieve, about their cruelty, about the joy they'd taken in destroying something precious to me. Counteroffer, I said. We'll sell the assets back at cost. No profit, on 2 conditions. First, they establish a charitable foundation, minimum $50 million, dedicated to arts education for underprivileged children, in perpetuity. Second, both Arabella and Genevieve volunteer at that foundation, in person, minimum 20 hours a month for the next 5 years. No delegating, no writing checks from afar. Actual work. Heinrich raised an eyebrow. That's remarkably lenient, Your Highness. Is it? I asked. I'm forcing 2 women who've never worked a day in their lives to spend time with the kind of people they've always looked down on, to contribute something meaningful to the world instead of just consuming, to learn empathy through direct contact with those less fortunate. I smiled. Trust me, for women like them, that's a punishment worse than financial ruin. As you wish, Your Highness. And what about James Blackwood? He's sent several letters requesting an audience with you. He's quite persistent. I thought about those letters. I'd read the first few before instructing my staff to file them away unread. They'd started formal, then become desperate, then philosophical. In the last one I'd read, he'd written, I understand now what you were trying to teach me. I failed the test. I failed you, but I'm trying to be better. I've cut off my sisters. I've quit my job and started volunteering at a literacy program in the Bronx. I'm trying to become the man I pretended to be when we met. Not for you. I know I've lost you, but for myself, because you showed me who I could have been, and I want to be that person. It was a beautiful letter, sincere, growth-oriented. It didn't change anything. Tell him I wish him well in his journey, I said, but I won't be granting an audience. That chapter of my life is closed. Very good, Your Highness. As Heinrich walked away to execute my orders, I stood alone for a moment at the edge of the ballroom, watching my family and the courtiers celebrate my return. This was my world. These were my people. This was the life I'd been born to. It wasn't a fairy tale. It came with responsibilities and restrictions and expectations that would have crushed the Emma Hayes persona I'd created. But it was real. It was mine, and I'd earned the right to claim it fully by learning exactly what happened when I tried to walk away from it. Some people are born to power. I was one of them, and I'd learned that power wasn't something to be ashamed of or hidden. It was a tool. It could be used cruelly, like Arabella and Genevieve used their wealth and status to demean others. Or it could be used justly, to create change, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, to build something meaningful. I chose the latter. My experiment in normal life had taught me that people were people, regardless of their bank accounts. They could be kind or cruel, genuine or false, strong or weak. Money didn't change human nature. It just revealed it. Arabella and Genevieve's cruelty had been revealed. James's weakness had been revealed. And my own strength had been revealed too. The strength to walk away. The strength to demand respect. The strength to use my power not for petty revenge, but for justice and growth. True power, I'd learned, doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to prove itself through designer labels or expensive restaurants or putting others down to lift yourself up. True power is quiet and certain. It's knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth, and never accepting less than what you deserve. Emma Hayes, the modest archivist, had taught me that, and Crown Princess Emma von Rothenburg would never forget it. So what did you think of this story of justice and revelation? Did those arrogant sisters get exactly what they deserved when they destroyed that ring? Did you feel the satisfaction when those royal SUVs arrived and the guards delivered that $25 million sapphire? If you loved watching entitled bullies learn that they picked on the wrong woman, if you enjoyed seeing someone stand up for themselves with the full weight of royal authority behind them, then smash that like button right now. Share this story with anyone who's ever been underestimated, anyone who's ever been judged for what they have instead of who they are. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of karma, justice, and people getting exactly what they deserve. Because the universe has a way of balancing the scales, and the best revenge is watching someone realize they've destroyed their own lives through their cruelty. Hit that notification bell, drop a comment about what you would have done in Emma's position, and remember, never judge someone by appearances, because you never know when that nobody you're mocking might be royalty in disguise.